Hello, ladies and gentlemen, Weber here, and I'm back with the first episode of RevEelooTion. I know you've all been asking it and wanting it, so here we go. I'm going to be splitting this up into 3 videos to start out with for our 3 various vehicles, launching them into orbit and building them as we're doing right now. Right now we're working on the Santa Claus. I wanted to put a little cupola on the top of it there because, hey, if you're on an alien planet, why not be able to have an awesome window to look out the entire time? So as you know, or don't know, the Santa Claus is the vessel that is going to be landing on the surface of Eeloo. It's a cute little lander, and I've got it here. It needs to have, according to our mission parameters, it needs to have at least 2,000 Delta V in order to land and take off from Eeloo. It should be able to take off and land using 1,500, but I'm adding an extra 500 because of my horrible piloting skills. Here we go. This is what's really cool about the 0.22. We switched to 0.22, so that probe that we sent in the previous episode isn't on there. But, you know, I guess it doesn't need to be on there. I could send another one if I wanted to, but I don't know. We'll see. What's cool is we have all this science, is what I was going to say. We can go to Eeloo and science it up down there, which is going to be fun. So I added the extra science stuff that we had. Also, the ship didn't quite have the thrust to weight ratio. It was just below a 1, which I know Eeloo has less gravity, so that doesn't make as much of a difference. But I added a few extra rockets because we had the extra fuel to do it. And I wanted, you know, I could have added a stronger rocket, I guess, with a better specific impulse. But I wanted it to sit closer to the ground, and I sort of like the way this thing looks. So I like it this way. And you put those what do you call them? Reaction control wheels on the top so we can get a little bit of free movement. And I also added just a little bit of RCS because we are going to have to be docking with this thing. And some lights because, hey, they're going to be on the surface for, I think, I'll have to see, but I think it's about 60 days that they're going to be on the surface of Eeloo, which, you know, you're probably going to have some night time. It's also going to be kind of dark on Eeloo. I know because it's Kerbal Space Program, it doesn't look super dark when you get out there. But in real life, if you were to go somewhere like Pluto, which I know Pluto isn't a planet, but, you know, it's sort of an analog to Eeloo. If you were to go somewhere like Pluto, you'd be quite dark out there, actually. You know, actually, it gets pretty dark even out at Jupiter. Yeah, the sunlight falls off pretty quickly, the amount of sunlight that you get. Once again, the Bill Nye video on Juno, the spacecraft Juno that's heading out to Jupiter. He explains a lot of cool stuff, and one of them is about the amount of light that a spacecraft gets when it goes out to Jupiter. And it was sort of ridiculous. It was like the Juno spacecraft, once it gets to Jupiter, it doesn't even have enough power to run a hairdryer. That's how little it is. And yet they're running complicated math and sciencey stuff. Not quite as complicated as the goo that the Kerbal's checking the goo, the purple goo or whatever color goo it is. Yeah, not quite as complicated as that. Because, you know, it's just NASA. Yeah. I don't mean no harm, NASA. I'm not trying to hate on you. So here we have our transfer vehicle. And once again, it's pretty standard. It's really similar to the transfer vehicle that I sent out to Moho in Sweet Emotion. It's 2 nuclear rockets attached to a center stage that has a bunch of fuel in it. low thrust to weight ratio, but doesn't matter. We'll do it the same way that we did it before, utilizing the Oberth effect and all that other goody stuff. And so here I put on the top, you can see I put nose cones on the top with decouplers. I discovered that 0.22, the nose cones actually help stabilize your flight through the atmosphere, which is really cool. I don't know to what extent they stabilize your flight through the atmosphere, but apparently they do. So I'm adding them to my ship at the beginning whenever I can. And yeah, I guess I could add nose cones to these things too, but I don't because Kerbal. Yeah, so I add the nose cones there, but I added decouplers because, hey, they're just extra weight once we get out of the atmosphere, basically, or even into the upper atmosphere. It's just really extra weight that we're carrying. So those decouplers should do a pretty good job. They're explosive. They'll explode it off, and then they'll hopefully not come back and run into our ship, because I plan on decoupling them when we're still sort of gravity turning up a little bit. So hopefully we'll miss them by a little bit. And yeah, the transfer stage, what is this called? The launch stage. The launch stage is your standard asparagus staged launch stage. It's the one that everybody uses. You just make sure that your Rockomax engines are not touching a yellow or an orange tank, because, yeah, you don't want that. So that's a pretty standard launch stage. And then I realized on this thing, I don't really have any way of docking it to something with a small docking port. So I added this little thing with a decoupler at the top of the cupola. I figure I can use that to rendezvous when we're in orbit in Eeloo. And then once we get out of Eeloo orbit, in order to land on Eeloo, we can just decouple that. I added a decoupler to that. We can decouple that and it'll crash into the surface of Eeloo at some point, and we don't have to worry about it. No big deal. So here I am. I'm just checking the order of my staging, because it would be horrible if we accidentally staged something off early that we didn't want to stage off. And then I'm checking the math. Essentially, we're looking at the delta V that Mechjeb is providing us here, and the most important thing that I'm worried about is this launch stage here. If those don't add up to about 4,500, the atmosphere delta V, if that doesn't add up to about 4,500, you can be pretty sure you're going to have a tough time getting into space. So what I ended up doing is I just used one of the fuel tubes, I guess, the fuel pumps from the transfer stage, and attached it to the first stage of my asparagus engine, which it worked out okay, kind of, only it wasn't distributing easily. That wasn't that hard. You just select the bottom one and then transfer manually into the one that's bleeding off more fuel. It's a little bit of an inconvenience, but hey, I'm only launching this once, so minor inconvenience. Yeah, so that should take care of that. I mean, it's sort of like adding extra fuel tanks, only you end up keeping them, and then once we're in orbit, any extra fuel we get, we can just send a fuel tanker up to refuel that. Just like we did with the Sweet Emoto Shun series. If you recall, at the beginning of that, we sent up a fuel tanker. I think it had 3 orange tanks, which is sort of overkill for this vessel, but if we needed to fuel tank any fuel up there, we know that we can do it. So from here on out, it's just a pretty standard launch. For Mechjeb, I know I've explained this a little bit before. I really like to have the orbital info and the delta V windows opened when I'm launching. I don't have Mechjeb launch for me because I think that's maybe a little bit of cheating. I don't know. Also, sometimes it doesn't launch quite the way that I want it to launch, because with some of these, the thrust to weight ratio can get a little high, and if the thrust to weight ratio on launch is above 2 and your vessel, you're a little worried that it might break apart. If it's above 2, it starts experiencing some higher G's. So I like to manually adjust that to keep it above 1 but below 2. Somewhere in there seems to be the sweet zone. You're not really worried about efficiency or anything like that if you're in there. Yeah, that makes sense. So a pretty standard launch here. I was actually surprised at how well this thing went. I guess it's a testament to how good I am at doing the Kerbal thing. And there they go. The nose cones launch off and fly past us. It works perfectly. And I'm just looking right now, staring at my delta V stats, how much Atmo delta V or vacuum delta V I have left on this thing versus my orbital speed. The orbital speed needs to get about to 2.2 kilometers per second in order for the ship to orbit. And according to that, it looks like we're going to have some extra fuel. So I was worried about that a little bit as far as launching, but it would appear that we are going to have a little extra, and we'll see if we even need to refuel this vessel. So here we are, bringing our apoapsis up to 75 kilometers, which is nice. And then I'll just transfer the fuel from this stage in, and we can use that transfer stage. We use the engines for those in order to get us a stable orbit, because I don't want the rest of this fuel transfer stage stuck in orbit up here. So there it goes. That'll crash back down to Kerbin, and then this thing we can just come forward up to our apoapsis and pull this thing up so it can orbit and eventually, in the future, launch out to Eeloo. And it looks like Jeb hitched a ride on our ship. Yeah, he wasn't supposed to go up. We're going to use a separate transfer stage to bring all the crew up. And they're not even transferring in this vessel. This vessel's one of the vessels that's going first. So maybe when we bring that transfer stage up, we'll have to rendezvous with this one to recover Jeb. Or just bring him down at the beginning, because... yeah, he's going to be waiting a little while because I think I'm going to wait till about 4 years in the future, 3 years in the future. That gives us one of the quickest trips to Eeloo. So I'm going to wait for that for our crew because we don't want them waiting in space for too long. So with that concludes the return of RevEelooTion. And as always, thanks for watching and stay entertained.